Hi, everyone. I'm Randy Hausman with Becker's Healthcare. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Optimizing Epic Community Connect, Strategies for Success from Both Sides of the Connection. Before we begin, I'll walk us through a few quick housekeeping instructions. We'll start today's webinar with a presentation and we'll time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. Today's session is being recorded and it will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. Finally, if at any time you're having trouble with your audio or your visuals, please try refreshing your browser. You can also submit any technical questions into the Q&A box. Our team's here to help. With that, I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers: Stephanie Murray, Senior Director of Epic Services at CereCore, and Lyndsay Schuering, Project Manager of Epic Services at CereCore. Thank you, Lyndsay and Stephanie, for being here today. I'll now turn the floor over to Stephanie to get us started.
Thank you, Randy. Appreciate it. We'll just do a little bit further of an introduction here for both of us. I'm Stephanie Murray. As Randy said, I'm a Senior Director here with Epic Services at CereCore. I have about 19 years of healthcare IT industry experience. I used to work at Epic once upon a time ago, so today we'll be talking about Epic Community Connect. I do hold 7 Epic certifications. I have done the leadership training for Community Connect as well. And I guess I'm very excited to talk to you today about some of the communication and coordination needed for that. And then Lyndsay, if you want to briefly introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lyndsay Schuering. I have over 9 years experience in the healthcare IT industry. Like Stephanie, I used to work at Epic. I was on the Epic Connect leadership team for majority of the time I was there. I was also the Epic Cogito Connect application lead. I also took the Connect leadership course. I also wrote a bit of it, so I'm really familiar with it. Excited to be here today and get started.
Excellent. So a little bit about CereCore. CereCore is a firm that offers services across the board. So while we're here to talk mostly about Epic today, CereCore does provide services for a lot of the EHRs, including Meditech, Oracle Health, etc. And we do it from the front to the end. So anything from legacy support to deciding what system you're going to go with, to doing that transition from one system to another, to hosting your new system. So we do offer a lot of things. So if you have any questions about anything, we're more than happy to answer them. But today, we are going to focus on Epic Community Connect. So what do you want to get out of this session? What to expect? Today, we're going to talk about the Community Connect model. We are going to mention both the host and the site perspective. So no matter where you fall, we'll hopefully touch on some things that are relevant to you. We'll talk about some common pitfalls to avoid when thinking about doing Community Connect, or if you're in the process of doing Community Connect. And we'll give you some practical advice for implementing or participating in the program. What we hope you get out of this session is how to evaluate if Community Connect is the right fit for you, learn some considerations to think about when you're in your contracting process or you're designing your support model, you're trying to decide what to do with governance or communication. And then also understand some strategies for implementation and support, since it's not just a one and done type of thing.
So what is Community Connect for those who aren't familiar? It is a program where a current Epic Direct customer extends their instance of Epic to a non-owned entity. That entity could be a smaller health system, could be a hospital, a physician group, a group of clinics, etc. The group that is extending their instance, so that existing Epic customer, is called the host, and those non-owned entities are called sites. We're going to use that language throughout the rest of the presentation. The original thought process, or one of them, behind the Community Connect program was to improve care coordination and data sharing for those groups that had a shared patient population. From a Connect Sites perspective, you might decide to explore Community Connect to get access to Epic's robust ecosystem, even though you might not be the best fit for a direct Epic customer. Now, Connect is way more than just having a successful technical implementation. It goes beyond just giving those sites logins to your Epic instance. It's really about having that shared communication and governance and ongoing support and working together throughout the entire process.
All right, so like I mentioned before, we are going to be talking both from the host and the site perspective. So first off, let's cover sites, as Lyndsay said, let's cover hosts. As Lyndsay said, that is the organization that has Epic directly. So are you first considering being a potential host for the Epic Community Connect program? One of the things you'll want to consider is the patient overlap and the continuity of care that Community Connect can offer. So perhaps you're in an environment where you have folks surrounding you that you want to share that patient care with, and it's more accessible if you share the system because it's less data transfers and those kinds of things, and you're all entering data into the same system, so it's all very easily accessible. So that may be a reason that you decide to send your instance of Epic to others. One thing to definitely consider as well is, are you prepared as the host to build and foster that ongoing relationship with your Connect site? It is a service provider mentality once you are a host because you are extending your instance of Epic to others. And so it's a different sort of dynamic than you perhaps have within your own healthcare system because you are offering that as a service. And so therefore, you have to ensure that they're getting what they need as well. And you have that customer service mentality. So it's definitely something to consider when you're considering whether being a host is the right fit for you.
So if you're considering becoming a site or Community Connect site and partnering with one of these hosts, you're likely also thinking through, is Epic right for me? So we're thinking through all of our different EHR options. And again, let's say you are not the right fit to be an Epic Direct customer, whether that be cost, whether that be you wouldn't have the IT staff to support your own instance of Epic. You're likely going through that evaluation. After you've decided that Community Connect is the right path, or that's the path we want to explore, you're going to start evaluating different hosts. And so one way to do that is to look and see if different hosts are accredited. So accreditation in Epic Connect's program is just a way for hosts to show that they have happy Connect sites, they're adopting the latest functionality of Epic, not just having it in their system, but also using it and adopting it well. And they're also following best practices, not only Epic best practices for implementation, ongoing support and maintenance, but the Connect specific best practices.
And I was just told that it's hard to hear me. So is this any better? I know, I'm just wondering if anyone could give me the thumbs up or the thumbs down.
Yes, I'll just hop in here. It's sounding a lot better.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for letting me know. I wouldn't want to go through the whole presentation without you being able to hear me. So appreciate that. All right, so let's talk through choosing what is right for you. There are a lot of options to consider, and there are a lot of things that go into that consideration. So we're going to talk through all of these. The first being cost. Again, from both the host and the Connect site perspective, you have to consider cost. From the host side, the cost to extend it. So you're increasing licensure, et cetera. You're extending all of your technology to that Connect site. And then obviously for the site, how much does it cost to get all of this? One thing I encourage people to consider is your total cost of ownership. So it is not just the licensure costs. It's a lot more than just license. It's the implementation costs, because usually there's a one-time implementation fee, and then there's the maintenance costs as well. Similarly, if you have to keep any of your third parties or if you have third-party costs, you want to take that into consideration, as well as any resources that you might need to support the model, either from the host perspective or from the site perspective. If you have to bring on additional staff to support the implementation or to support the maintenance, you'll want to consider that when you're thinking through how much the cost is going to be. And then we'll talk about offerings. So one of the things to consider is, what does the host extend? So you can extend certain modules, you can extend everything. There are certain third parties you could keep as part of your program as well that the site can take advantage of. And so as a site, do you want to take that whole package? Do you want to take pieces of it? Are you allowed to take pieces of it? What is really included in that offering is something to consider, again, both when extending out as well as when you are that site getting that functionality. I do have culture on here. We'll talk about culture a little bit more later, but it is important to have a similar culture or the right culture fit when you are deciding what your site or what your host is going to be. So ensuring y'all get along, you have similar communication strategies. Like I said, we'll get into a little bit more of that in a minute, but culture is something to consider as well. And then ongoing support. So remember, this isn't just the implementation. It's not just, okay, I get Epic and now everything's magical and it's perfect. You do have to consider the ongoing support and maintenance model that you're signing up for or that you're extending. Do you have the right staff mix to be able to support both your healthcare organization as well as any of your sites? And from a site perspective, do you have the right amount of support that needs to be there in order to support this as well? Do you have the staff that may need to fill in some of the gaps that the host may not provide? And then roles and responsibilities. So there are a lot of things that go into extending Epic from a community connect perspective. So you're thinking about networking, there's tunneling, there's training. There's a lot of things other than just the software itself. And so ensuring that when you're evaluating whether this is the right type of program for you, you have the staff and the roles at your organization so that everything is covered. And it's something that you work together with your host and your site, but making sure you talk through those things to determine who's going to do what, so that there aren't any gaps, but there also isn't a bunch of overlap either. And I know I've talked a little bit about this already, but staffing. So throughout your project, whether it's planning for it, whether it's doing the implementation, or whether it's during your maintenance and support timeframe, it's important to have the right staff in place to be able to execute on those initiatives. There are different models you can use. You can use existing staff, you can get new staff, you can use short-term staff through a consulting firm. But just keeping in mind what staffing is going to be required, again, both from the host side as well as the site thing, is important. Autonomy. So when we talk about autonomy, as Lyndsay mentioned, Epic's Community Connect program is when you extend your instance of Epic to someone else. Well, with that goes a lot of maintenance and build, and one of the things to consider is how much autonomy will the site or will sites have to make their own customizations. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean new development, but rather maybe a tweak here or there to a setting that isn't consistent with the rest of your organization. We'll get into this a little bit as well, but with governance, it's helpful to have governance in place so that there's a mutual understanding of what can and cannot be altered. But when you're getting into the relationship and you're evaluating whether someone is the right fit for you or not, that level of autonomy is something important to discuss so that both parties are on the same page. And then technical debt. So some sites might come in with some technical debt, meaning they have systems that need to be replaced, or perhaps aren't on a version that are compatible with integrating with Epic. So it's something that needs to be considered as part of your total cost of ownership as well, either in the good way because you'll get rid of technical debt, or in a way that you need to address before moving forward with the program. And then from a host perspective, you'll also want to evaluate whether you have any technical debt, because you don't want to extend that technical debt to a site. All right, so then let's say you've decided to choose Epic Community Connect, either as a host or a site. There are some things that you'll want to consider as you go through that program. So some of the things that we're going to point out today, the first is common goals. So making sure that you as the host organization and the site have goal alignment is very important. It's important to understand what the goals of each party are, that the goal is clear, that actions being taken contribute to obtaining those goals. It's very important that stakeholders are aligned and understanding what's the overall purpose, why are we doing this? Nobody wants to do something just because. So it is quite important to understand the why behind everything and what are you trying to achieve. And to do this, you'll want to include the right people. So by this, I mean the different types. So are decision makers included? Are the people that are doing the delivery or implementation included? Are the support services included? Ensuring that each phase of the project has those representatives so that everybody's on the same page and moving towards the same common goal. And then you'll also want to make sure the right roles are included when you're talking about this type of initiative. So you'll want to include operations, finance, business, clinical, technical, legal. So there are a lot of different parties that are involved when trying to decide, okay, we've decided on Epic Community Connect, how do we move forward? So making sure all those roles are included, so again, everybody's on the same page and moving toward that common goal is really important up front. So let's talk about ROI. I'm sure you are all familiar with generating business cases for things that you want to get implemented. And a big part of that is oftentimes articulating what the ROI will be. So it's important to identify what ROI goals you have early so that you can measure baselines when appropriate or when possible. But again, having that common understanding of where are we trying to get to, why are we trying to get there, where are we going is very important. And how do we measure it? And how do we make sure we're successful? So it's great when both parties, both the host and the site, can understand the other's ROI goals as well, because then you can help each other get there. One thing to keep in mind is that ROI does not have to be financial. I think when a lot of folks think of ROI, it's just the dollars, which clearly are very important. But it's also, you could also measure some of those non-financial things to help encourage the ROI and to help articulate why you're doing this. So some things could be time savings, which you can equate to dollars if you want to do that, but also things like patient satisfaction, provider satisfaction. You know, if you're a provider and you can automatically see this patient's data, even though they were somewhere else and they didn't get their services directly through you, that's great. That's probably a great provider satisfaction. Similarly with a patient, if you can go from one facility to another and they don't ask you the same 40 questions over and over again, you're probably pretty happy about that because all of your information is in that one system. So remember, when you're thinking of ROI, it's not just the pure finances, which again, I understand are quite important, but there are other things you can consider as well. One thing I will point out is this using Epic's native functionality piece. That can be a key part of your business strategy or your ROI considerations as well, because if you're using Epic's robust native functionality, that may eliminate some third parties that you have to use, or it may eliminate some third parties that you would have had to purchase if you were still using your legacy system. It also may eliminate some cybersecurity risk because it's all coming from one place. So keep in mind those things as well as you work through ROI and you work through your goals and setting them and measuring them. All right, I know I said before that we were going to talk about culture a little bit more thoroughly, so here's that slide, which we'll do now. So I wanted to just talk about when you're evaluating whether a host or a site is the right fit for your program, it's important to consider culture. So culture obviously can mean a lot of different things, so I put some things on this slide just to talk through briefly. One of those is communication. What are the communication strategies in place between the host and the site? Are they both open to very elaborate communication and robust communication, because that is going to be one of the keys to your program's success, is going to be how well the communication flows. Similarly, collaboration. It's very important that it's a team effort, if you will, because obviously you're extending your instance of Epic and supporting that instance of Epic, and then you're receiving that instance and you want to be in it, and you want to make the experience as good as it can be for both sides. Accountability. Are there accountability mechanisms in place? So perhaps something doesn't go to plan. Is there a way to escalate, to hold folks accountable to what was agreed upon? And is there a way set up front so that it's there and it's able to be used, and it isn't one of those awkward conversations where you aren't sure where you have to go to escalate? Engagement. So I'm just following the little path there. But engagement. So with engagement, I know we talked about this a little bit before, but making sure that your users and your analysts and the operations, all those areas of your organization are involved and informed is really important. You don't want this to feel like I'm doing this to you or you have to do this. You want that engagement, that involvement, that buy-in up front and throughout the project, so that people can voice their opinions, their concerns, or their suggestions, so that you can make that project as successful as it can be. With that, of course, comes change management. I know change is everyone's favorite thing, so change is definitely something that needs to be managed, for lack of a better word. So it's important to have those strategies and processes in place so that you can articulate that change. And again, going back to those common goals, really relay why you're doing this, how it relates to your organization's goals, and really help those involved understand what the purpose is and why you're doing it. And at the same time, the next one is realistic expectations. It's important to realize that this is going to be hard for some folks. Maybe they're not super excited to get a new system. Maybe they loved their old system. So it's important to give people that minute or that moment to adjust, because it's not all going to be rainbows. There might be some hiccups along the way. And so it's important to set those expectations, especially if someone was on a system that they really liked. And so to work through with them how the transition is going to go, and make sure that they're heard and that you can address their concerns. With all of that as well, governance. So I know that's probably everybody else's favorite word, because governance is very important to any sort of program or project. But with this type of relationship with hosts and sites, it's important that each party understands the governance in play at the other organizations. So you'll have multiple sites potentially, hopefully, that need to be part of the governance program. And again, this goes back to that autonomy piece as well for the sites. So if you are all in one system and you have to maintain one system, that's great. But it does require a certain level of overarching governance to understand what can be changed, what can't be changed, what do the multiple groups have to agree upon, and what's customizable to each individual facility or site or clinic. So ensuring that those governance processes, structures, etc., are in place is very important. It's going to look different probably for everybody, but ensuring that they're there and they're working and that they can be tweaked if needed is important to acknowledge. The next one, the commitment to maintain and scale. What I meant by this is Epic is a very robust system, has a lot of excellent functionality, and has a lot of new cool stuff coming out as well. And so you want to make sure that as a site and as a host, you're committed to going forward with that functionality, and you're committed to maintaining it and to adopting it. Now, it doesn't mean you have to adopt it right away as soon as it comes out, but understand that one of the benefits of going with a system like this is all of those features. And so having that commitment to take those new features and then to roll them out as well is important. And then the service provider mentality, I know I touched on a little bit, but again, as a host, making sure that you are prepared to have that sort of customer service focus when dealing with the sites is important, because you are now offering a service. You are now tied to that through contract for that service. And so it's important to have that sort of customer mindset when talking with the sites and making sure they're getting what they need. And similarly with the sites, it's important to feel comfortable with your host so that if something is super awesome, you can tell them that. Or if something needs improvement, you can tell them that as well. So it's just important to establish that relationship and ensure those communication lines are open. All right.
So you've decided that you want to either refresh your Connect program, you want to explore becoming a host, want to explore becoming a site. We want to shift gears and chat about some pitfalls throughout the entire process. So in contracting, this is where we want to set expectations in a lot of different areas so everybody starts on the same language, we understand what should happen throughout the process, and we go into it setting ourselves up for success. During implementation, we really want to foster great communication. We want the right information, getting to the right people at the right time, and everybody is as ready for go live as you can be. And then now we're switching into our support model or maintenance mode, kind of realigning those expectations. We just got out of go live. We're shifting gears a little bit, want to make sure everybody understands what that's going to look like, and we continue to foster those communication paths and those relationships. And then circling back to governance, it's going to weave through all of it, making sure that we have that shared governance, we have those escalation paths and processes, and everybody knows what they need to do and how to get their voices heard appropriately. So with that, I want to do a quick poll to talk about and see if the audience is more interested in any of those things than anything else. Don't worry, we will talk about all of them, but just in case anybody has a stronger interest in any of these, want to make sure to hit on that one a little bit harder. So in the Community Connect space, what are you most curious about here?
And as Lyndsay said, we are going to talk about all of these, but if there's a specific interest in any of them, we obviously want to know that in order to go more in detail if needed. But there are some options here. I think it should pop up on your screen to be able to select those. So I'll just give everybody a moment to select your option, and then we'll move forward to the next screen to see what your responses are. All right, I'm gonna move forward. So we'll see some of these come in, but looks like we've got a tie for the for the top, 21.6 for 3 of them. Looks like IT support models, upfront and long-term costs, and limited autonomy and configuration control seem to be the top. But again, we'll talk about all of these.
Right, so in the contracting phase, like I mentioned, this is where we're setting expectations. So talking about what does your scope look like? This should be your application scope. What applications would you be extending to the site? Is there an additional cost for those applications? Some Epic things have subscription fees. We want to make sure we understand that cost. And then third parties. Likely as a site, you have a list of third parties you work with today. Are you going to be transitioning all of that functionality into Epic and the host third parties? If you are, who's managing that relationship with those vendors? Do you as a site need to work directly with the vendor for any costs and contracting, or is that going to all funnel through the host? Or let's say there's a third party that has some functionality that Epic or your host third parties don't have an equivalent to. How does that get managed? Is that an additional cost? Is that something you can work into your implementation? Or will that be something you have to work with after the fact, kind of post go live in your support and optimization phase? Also, something to consider here early on in your contracting conversations is setting expectations around if either group has an expectation for either group of insurance coverage and any liability. So if there is a requirement from either side, let's communicate that early on so that we can, again, align on expectations. We also want to establish communication pathways here. Obviously, a lot of this stuff could be kind of in theory currently, but we want to make sure everybody understands if something happens, like if we have an incident, if there is a downtime, what are the communication requirements about that? How long in advance would anybody get communication for things that are planned, like an upgrade or system updates or large projects from both sides? We want to make sure everybody understands any communication requirements. We know the paths that we can communicate through both groups. And in your contract, you also want to understand the terms and the termination of the contract. So how long is your contract for? What do negotiations look like when that contract is coming to the end of the term? What are ways that you could terminate the contract if need be? Hopefully you won't, but acquisitions happen all the time. So what do you need to do if you as a host get acquired, if you as a site get acquired? What does the communication look like there? How do you get any data out of the system that you might need? Does a support model change as you're in a termination transition? Making sure everybody is clear on terms and termination. And then the cost model, probably the piece that people think about most in this phase. We want to understand every item of the cost model. The fixed items are pretty self-explanatory. We understand what those are, and folks understand that they could change as inflation changes. But for those variable costs, what is each line item? What does it mean? How could it change? Is there any sort of communication requirement for when things change more than X percent? How long in advance would you as a site like to know that those things are changing? And then maybe there is a cost for things like large optimization requests or modification, making sure we understand what the parameters around that are. If the modification is more than 100 hours, is that an additional cost? If it's going to take longer than 2 months, is that an additional cost? Making sure we know the full cost model, both the fixed things and any additional variable cost. And then finally, really making sure we're setting everybody up for success as we kick off implementation. We want to make sure we establish those roles and responsibilities. Who is doing what from both sides, and does that change over time? If you have a Connect site that you want to have a little bit more autonomy, does build start with the host team and slowly transition to the site as they get more familiar? Do they pick up those responsibilities post-live? What about things like testing and training, and how do all of the support different areas fit into your roles and responsibilities? And then again, clearly defining your Connect site autonomy. So you've signed the contract, you're getting ready to go for implementation. You will have the same issues as any other implementation in the Connect space. It's still an implementation, just a little bit more complicated because now you have two organizations in the same system. So again, we've established those communications in the contracting phase. We want to continue to do that throughout the implementation. So we have already talked about our third-party scope, but what about things like our data conversion? How much data are we bringing in? What data elements are we bringing in from the Connect site's legacy systems? Is there any archiving we need to consider? Where are those data elements going to live in Epic? All of those things need to be considered, and that expectation needs to be set early and often. Again, thinking back to that technical debt, make sure we're talking about it as we're planning all the different activities within an implementation. And one of the big pieces of implementation is going to be that workflow build and adoption phase. So we want to understand what workflows we're just adopting as a Connect site. This is the way that the workflow is. What do we need to do to make sure we have a successful adoption of that? And what are areas that we do have some configuration options, whether that's a tweak here or there, or is it a fully customizable workflow? And how we do that is through engaging and having a really robust training, and readiness program. So that is going to mean operations is engaged early in the project, throughout the entire project, and we're thinking of change management as more than just, okay, here's the change that's going to happen between our systems, but outside of that as well. Is there documentation we need to update? Is there processes we need to update? Do we need to change something in our procedures or how we function as an organization to have successful adoption of these different workflows? And then outside of kind of the end user training, we want to think about, do we need any IT training? Is there going to be support that the Connect site takes on post-live that we want to make sure as a host, we're transferring that knowledge to them? If they want to have more autonomy post-live, how do we set them up for that success? And then also from a site's perspective, is there things your host needs to know about how you function as an organization? Are there groups that might be more vocal that we want to make sure to get them involved early in the process and circle back with them post-live? Continuing that bi-directional communication. And don't forget, part of your training program and part of your readiness program, the whole goal of it is to get ready for go live. So we're talking about go live, we're there, we're getting into the go live mode. We want to make sure we also understand how we're transitioning to post live and to support. How long is the command center support going to look like? How does that transition work? Do roles and responsibilities change? So going into our support mode, we want to make sure everybody understands any changes to the system, any downtimes, hopefully not unplanned, but it could happen. So ensuring we know what communication is going to come down. What are our downtime procedures? How do we know if there's going to be an update to the system? We want to communicate those things early so that groups do have time to adjust to change. And again, do any readiness outside of here's the new workflow that might need to occur. A big part of maintenance, we know, is the issue backlog and resolving issues and prioritizing requests. So it's really important from a host perspective that those processes are incredibly transparent to your site. You don't want your site to feel like their concerns are just going into the void. And you as a site also want to understand how your items are getting prioritized. You've got multiple groups trying to prioritize against their organizational goals. So ensuring that that process is transparent, that both parties are involved, and for issues that we understand resolution time expectations. Do we have SLAs? Do we have escalation paths? Does everybody know what they are and how to use them appropriately? And then also thinking back and resetting those expectations if you're a host that you are now a service provider. So you need to have that service provider mentality. Maybe that means you do a refresher course of kind of customer service for your Connect support team. And maybe if you're the project director or a project manager or a program manager, you're thinking about managing the entire Connect program almost as a portfolio. So ensuring that it's successful across the board.
And I promise I'm moving the slides forward. Oh, there we go.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. And tying it all together, kind of a common theme throughout all of this you've heard is communication. And how do we do that is governance. So we want to have those shared implementation goals that Stephanie talked about early on. That can be just about anything. It could be things like your KPIs or those key performance indicators that you're measuring directly against pre-live and post-live. It could just be what does a successful implementation look like to both of you all, and ensure that you've agreed on those. And then making sure that as you're establishing your governance program from both the host and the site, that you have that joint participation. We have that shared decision-making power there. And we don't recommend that you start your governance from the ground up if you don't have to. Starting anything from zero is obviously way more difficult than if you kind of tack things onto your existing structure. If you have structures that work, if you've got committees that work, if you have processes that you've got down, add on to those rather than trying to create something not new from both parties. Just make sure that you've got that shared decision making and that shared communication and participation in governance, and that we have that clear project prioritization. Everybody understands how things get prioritized, how optimization projects come down, how change management happens, how do you know what changes are coming down, when they're coming down. One great way to foster a pretty easy communication path is having Connect site liaisons, or what Epic calls their customer success managers in the Connect space. So those folks can be assigned, if you're the host, can be assigned to just one Connect site, right? Maybe you have a larger Connect site, they have a lot of optimization requests, or they just have a lot more that they need to communicate with you because they have more end users. Or maybe they are assigned to a whole bunch of different smaller clinics. Ensuring that you have those folks and they're that direct line of communication. They're almost like the BFF in the Epic space. If you're a host, you have your BFF with Epic. They can be like that for your different Connect sites. And we want to ensure our governance program has those really clear change management standards that everybody understands and agrees upon.
So, Lyndsay, I think I might have skipped over one of your slides because it's stuck for me on slide 17, so I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
There we go. What slide are you seeing now?
19.
Okay, perfect. Okay, go ahead. Sorry if I skipped over one of your slides.
No, that's all right. So how do we do all of this and kind of getting a summarization of everything together here? So from a host, the first thing you want to do as you're establishing your program is define your roles and responsibilities from your team. So this is not just your analysts. This is those customer success managers. This is your trainers. This is your technical team. This is really everybody that would go into a successful Connect implementation and long-going support model. So defining those and then thinking about what kind of autonomy makes sense for your Connect sites. And does that shift in any roles and responsibilities, and ensuring you're creating a support model that can grow with your program. And then as you're developing your model, you're developing that governance model, you have lots of layers of transparency and accountability. You want to hold yourself accountable. You want to hold your team accountable. You want to make sure that everybody understands their expectations and that it's really clear to your sites, because again, we're having that service provider mentality. And for a site, get folks ready for change. Stuff will change inevitably. So having operations engaged early on in those operational readiness programs the entire time. So those are going to kick off really early in your implementation. They're going to be one of the first things that kind of gets moving outside of just initial conversations. They're going to participate in those workflow conversations, participate in adoption of meetings and training materials and all of that stuff. So make sure folks are prepared for that. You've got the right folks involved. And then also ask those questions about workflows. Really understand how the workflows are going to change from your current state. What limitations might they have? Where are opportunities for modifications or optimizations post-live, and what does that look like? You should be partnering with each other the entire time, from your initial, are we the right fit, all the way through long-term maintenance and support. You want to make sure you're establishing a model that is transparent and has clear communication pathways for both parties.
All right, so now we're getting to the part where why does it matter? So why are we talking about all of this? So really, there's several things you want to consider when you're making this decision and deciding to move forward. One is the total cost of ownership. Again, it isn't just the licensing costs. It is the licensing costs, but it's also the time investment. It's the third-party costs. It's the staffing costs, the implementation, the support model. All of those things need to go into consideration when you are talking about total cost of ownership and what sort of ROI you're trying to get out of the program. But in terms of, again, the more soft ROI, user satisfaction, patient satisfaction, continuity of care, those are all key things to keep in mind when you're deciding whether you want to do the program or not and why it matters. The other thing, again, is remember those organizational goals. What does your organization have as their goals? Does this program align with those goals? So keep all that in mind when you're deciding, or maybe redeciding. Maybe you tried to do this and it didn't work out and you want to try again. Keep these things in mind when you put forth your program. Some of the lessons learned that we've seen over the course of the years, that early alignment is really key to the success of the program, both from an organization standpoint, but also between that host and that site. Making sure you're on the same page, making sure you have open lines of communication. Also making sure, as the next point says, that support needs to evolve. So it isn't just the implementation and then you're done and you get to walk away. Epic is a living, breathing system, and so it does require that maintenance. And they're also always coming out with new features, so it requires a continuous rollout strategy so that you do get the latest and greatest and you can stay current on what's happening within the ecosystem. And with that, change management, obviously with all those changes taking place and the new functionality being available, we want to make sure that your change management practices are in place because they matter as much as the technology. So you can have all the technology in the world, but if there's nobody who knows how to use it or that it's there, then nobody's going to use it. So you definitely want to make sure that you have that process in place where people know what's coming. And finally, it is important to have expertise for the different phases of the planning through to optimization, especially if you're transitioning from one system to another. It's important to understand that translation. What do these terms mean in Epic versus what do they mean in your legacy system? How do we articulate those workflows so that we can get out of the system what we want? So just ensuring you have that expertise in place is quite important as well. And then obviously we at CereCore are always here to help if you need anything, no matter what phase you're in. So whether you're in that evaluation phase and you're trying to decide if you're the right cultural or technical fit for the program in general or for a particular host or site, it's something to keep in mind that you really do need to evaluate that your organization's readiness to move forward. Similarly, in the contracting phase, as Lyndsay was saying, make sure you understand cost, scope, roles, whatever is in that contract. It is a binding agreement as always, so make sure your legal's involved. Make sure that you have those right people involved in that phase. And then similarly with implementation, so when you are looking for support, make sure that you have that right expertise in place, that you have a robust team that can help you execute on your goals. And then for support, it's not just, okay, we're going to maintain. It is doing those optimizations and those new functionalities, as well as the standard maintenance with upgrades and updates. So keep all of that in mind. Regardless of what phase you're in, it's really important to pull in the right expertise and to ensure that the communication paths are open. With that, I will hand it back over to Randy for any questions that we might have gotten.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for the presentation. The first question we have is asking, how can we as a small FQHC lookalike clinic get Epic as our EHR? They mentioned cost is a major factor for us.
Sure. So when evaluating, there's different ways to get Epic. Obviously, you can go Epic Direct, which you can just call them and and ask them, and they'll, I'm sure, send you somebody. But you can evaluate Epic Direct, but cost is a huge factor in that. And then obviously there's this Epic Community Connect option. So if you're considering Epic Community Connect, but you're not sure how much it would cost, one of the ways you can figure that out is there is a website, or Epic's website, they do list the accredited hosts, so you can see which ones are in your area. And then I believe if you call Epic, they can give you the contact information for those particular programs, and you can reach out to them and have some discussions on whether they're accepting new sites, and start those conversations so that you can get an idea of what it might cost in your area. But there are other Epic programs in play as well, so they're becoming more robust as the years go on. So you can definitely go direct or you could go connect, and Epic does have some smaller programs in place as well to consider.
next question is asking, when does this module launch?
So Epic Community Connect is already available. Lyndsay, I don't know how long it's been around for, 10, 15 years maybe? I don't remember.
Plenty of years.
A while. Many of years. So Epic Community Connect, the program in general has been around for a while. So it is available now. However, just to clarify something, so not all Epic customers do Epic Community Connect. So it is a program that they have to decide to do. It's not just a given. So as Lyndsay mentioned, and I think I just mentioned too, the Epic's website does have the accredited hosts on there. So you can take a look there to see what your options are. But the program is up and running. It's just whether it's up and running at a location near you, you'll have to take a look at that website as well.
Thank you. Next question is asking, how did you manage security and ensure host can't see Connect and vice versa?
Sure. And Lyndsay, feel free to jump in here as well. But there are certain, while I cannot get into technical proprietary information of Epics on this call, there are certain things in place that allows the delineation of data between sites and hosts and different sites as well. Because obviously, if there are multiple sites on a particular instance, you wouldn't want to see everybody else's, and you don't want them to see your data either. So when it comes to financials and those types of things that wouldn't be shared, there are certain things technically in place that allow for that delineation. However, from a patient care standpoint, the main goal is to have that access to data and that overlap. So from a patient care standpoint, in terms of patient data and tests and those types of things, that will all be shared so that if a patient goes from one site to another or from a host to a site, that it facilitates that continuity of care for that patient, so they'll be able to see everything.
Great, thank you. The next question is asking, is it typical for hosts to have an SLA?
Oh, that's a good question. So I don't know how we're going to define the term typical. Some hosts have SLAs in their contracts and some do not. It isn't a requirement by any means because it is their prerogative to have that in their contract or not. But if it's not in writing or in the contract, it is definitely something you should discuss because it is quite important to have an understanding of turnaround times and what you can expect, at least from a site perspective in terms of the support you're going to be offered. So some do have it in their contracts and some do not. And no, that's not a very precise answer, but it's not a requirement.
Thank you for the nuance there. The next question I have is, how are AI solutions involved in Epic Community Connect?
Oh, okay. So as Lyndsay mentioned, when you are a host, you have Epic Direct. And then when you're a site, you are part of that system directly. It's not like you have your own little mini system or anything. You're logging into that same system as the site. And so whatever the host is deploying, they may or may not extend that to the site. So again, it's really important to have that communication, expectation, governance in place so that you know what features you're getting. Because again, it's the same system. So if the host organization is very excited about AI and they're going to deploy all the things, as a site, you probably get to take advantage of that because they'll probably deploy that to you as well. However, if the host is more reserved and doesn't want to yet venture into that space, they may not decide to take those features, and then therefore the Connect site most likely won't get them either. There are some scenarios where some sites might get things that the host doesn't, but that's pretty rare. So again, it's important up front to have an understanding of the mindset of the host as well, to understand, are they early adopters of functionality, or do they wait, or how quickly do they deploy things, but it is all the same system, so you're a little dependent on what the host does.
Gotcha. Our next question here is asking, what is the quantity of organizations in the host/site model? And they clarified, like, how many hosts are there, or how many average sites does each host have?
So I don't know that I'm privy to that data. Epic probably has information on that, but it varies wildly. You can go on the website, on Epic's website, and count the number of accredited hosts, but in terms of like who their sites are, I don't believe that is listed. Lyndsay, you may have more insight into that than I do, but.
No, it's not listed, but like Stephanie said, it varies. Some groups do choose to have a fairly small Connect program where it's just those groups that they have some sort of relationship with. Other organizations have huge Connect programs where they've got Connect sites all over the country, regardless of if they have any relationship with those other organizations.
Thank you. Next question I have is asking, is there any functionality that you don't get access to as a Connect site versus as Epic Direct?
So that sort of aligns with my answer previously, and it's a lot of it is dependent on the host. So again, you're all in the same system. So if a host decides to roll out a specific piece of functionality, it is likely that the Connect site will get it. Now, obviously, there are caveats to that. If the Connect site is a clinic and the functionality is more acute focused, maybe they won't get it because it's not relevant. But generally speaking, if the host has that piece of functionality, then the site would potentially have access to it. But again, it goes back to that change management and governance of whether they'll get it or not, or what the host's tolerance is for rolling those features out, and how that deployment works.
Thank you. Next question is asking, if we're a Connect site, will we lose all third parties?
So I'm going to say yes and no. So if you're a Connect site, you probably do have third parties just like everybody else has third parties. So oftentimes as part of a host's program, a Community Connect program, they also typically bundle some of those third parties with it because they need to use them as well. And you can sometimes take advantage of some cost offsets by going under their licensure just in terms of volume. So one of the things you'll have to take in mind is what is part of the host's Community Connect package in terms of what do you get with it in addition to Epic, because there are some third parties that are required and some that go with it. But that should all be worked out in your contract as well, just in terms of like what you're getting with the package. And then for the other third parties that perhaps don't fall under that package, you will either need to maintain them yourselves or work something out with your host. One of the things I typically tell folks to consider is ensuring that you're very clear with the host what third parties you have, because some of them may need to be upgraded in order to be compatible with Epic, so that's a cost you'll need to consider. Some of them might have security risks or may not be needed with Epic and their native functionality. So really work closely with your host to evaluate that list of third parties so that you have an understanding of where they sort of fit into the bigger picture, because perhaps you have a third party that you don't need anymore because Epic offers that functionality right within the system.
Thank you so much. I think that takes us right up to the top of the hour here. So thank you so much, Stephanie and Lyndsay, for the excellent presentation. Thank you, CereCore, for sponsoring today's webinar. Thanks for joining us to the audience, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.